Germany, 1517. The Catholic Church was selling forgiveness. Not metaphorically, literally. Pay enough money and a priest could hand you a document claiming your sins had been forgiven. Even the souls of dead relatives, people were told, could escape purgatory through payment. To millions of Christians, it was salvation. To the Church, it was business. And hidden inside that business was one of the richest men in Europe, a banker named Jakob Fugger. His money financed a religious system so controversial, it would eventually trigger the Protestant Reformation and split Christianity in half. If you've followed this channel, you already know who Fugger was. The richest man in history, a merchant from Augsburg who built a financial empire that stretched from Spain to Hungary. He financed kings. He decided elections. He controlled Europe's silver and copper mines. At his peak, historians estimate his fortune equaled roughly 2% of all of Europe's economic output. But wealth alone does not explain how he ended up at the center of the greatest religious revolution in Western history. To understand that, we need to go back to the Catholic Church. In the early 1500s, the Church was wealthy, powerful, and in permanent need of money. Pope Leo X had inherited a massive project, the rebuilding of St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. The grandest church in Christendom was already bleeding funds. Construction costs were enormous. Donations were not enough. The church needed a new income stream. They found it in indulgences. The idea was not entirely new. For centuries, the church had offered indulgences, pardons for sins, in exchange for acts of devotion or pilgrimage. But by the 1500s, something had changed. They were being sold directly, for cash, and nobody had figured out how to distribute them more efficiently. Until Albrecht of Brandenburg came along. Albrecht was young, ambitious, and deeply in debt. He wanted 3 church positions simultaneously: Archbishop of Mainz, Archbishop of Magdeburg, and administrator of Halberstadt. There was just one problem. Holding multiple church offices at once was forbidden by canon law. To get the Pope's permission, Albrecht needed to pay a fee, a bribe in all but name. The sum was staggering: 10,000 ducats. Albrecht did not have it, so he went to the only man in Europe who could provide that kind of money on short notice: Jakob Fugger. Fugger agreed to loan him the money, but here's where it gets interesting. Fugger was not doing charity. He needed repayment. And the repayment scheme they designed together was ingenious and catastrophic. The plan was this: Albrecht would sell indulgences across Germany. Half of the proceeds would go to Rome to fund the building of St. Peter's. The other half would go directly to Fugger's agents, repaying the loan. Fugger didn't just fund the deal. His representatives physically traveled alongside the indulgence sellers to collect the money. Think about what that means. Every German peasant who handed over a coin for the forgiveness of sins, their money didn't go to God. A portion of it went straight into the pocket of a banker in Augsburg. The most sacred transaction in the Christian world had become a financial instrument. One man saw all of this clearly. His name was Martin Luther. Luther was an Augustinian monk and a theology professor in Wittenberg. He was devout, serious, and increasingly troubled by what he was seeing. In his own town, he watched people sell their belongings, not out of genuine faith, but because a traveling salesman had convinced them that a piece of paper would protect their dead relatives from purgatory. The man selling the indulgences in his region was a Dominican friar named Johann Tetzel. Tetzel had a slogan: "As soon as the coin in the coffer rings, the soul from purgatory springs." Luther was furious. This was not theology. This was a transaction, a corrupt deal between a German archbishop a Roman pope, and a banker from Augsburg, sold to ordinary people who trusted their church. On October 31st, 1517, Luther wrote his 95 Theses, 95 arguments against the sale of indulgences, against the corruption, against the idea that forgiveness could be purchased. He sent them to Albrecht. He posted them, according to tradition, on the door of the castle church in Wittenberg. Within weeks, printed copies were circulating across Germany. Within months, the movement had spread beyond anything Luther had imagined. He had not intended to start a revolution. He had intended to start a debate. But the printing press was new. The anger was old. Europe had been waiting for a reason to question Rome. Luther gave them one. What followed became known as the Protestant Reformation, a split that divided Christianity into Catholics and Protestants, a fracture that would fuel wars, reshape empires, and alter the course of Western civilization for centuries. And at its origin, quietly, invisibly, was a banker's loan. Here is the part of the story almost nobody tells. Jakob Fugger was not a cynical man. He was deeply, sincerely Catholic. He attended Mass. He funded churches. He believed in the institution he helped fracture. And in his hometown of Augsburg, he built something remarkable. In 1516, just 1 year before Luther's Theses, Fugger completed the Fuggerei, a small neighborhood of homes built entirely for the poor. Residents paid a symbolic rent of 1 Rheingulden per year. In return, they had a roof, a community, and a daily obligation to pray for the Fugger family's soul. The Fuggerei still exists today. It is the oldest social housing project in the world. Fugger was not trying to destroy the church. He was not trying to trigger a revolution. He was simply doing what he had always done, finding an opportunity, structuring a deal, making sure he was repaid. But some deals have consequences no one can predict. The same financial instincts that made Fugger the most powerful man in Europe also, indirectly, made him one of the most consequential. He died in 1525, wealthy, respected, and buried with full Catholic rites. The Reformation he helped ignite outlived him by centuries. History remembers Martin Luther as the man who broke the Catholic Church. It remembers Pope Leo X as the Pope who let it happen. But behind both of them, invisible in the documents and loan agreements, was Jakob Fugger, a man who never held a sword, never wrote a sermon, and never claimed to be anything more than a banker. Yet his money flowed through the veins of the most powerful institution in the world. And when that institution needed it most, it was his deal that handed Luther the evidence he needed. Power is not always loud. Sometimes the most dangerous force in history is a quiet man with a ledger and a very large loan.